When we begin speaking about Syria and the end times, we cannot begin with politics. We must begin with prophecy. Because long before modern borders were drawn, long before headlines and breaking news cycles, the region known historically as Sham already occupied a unique place in the spiritual imagination of the Muslim world. The Prophet _Fdaf did not speak about it as a random geography. He spoke about it as a land of barakah, a land where faith would anchor itself when the world trembles. Now, what is Sham? It is not merely the modern state of Syria. Traditionally, it encompassed a broader region that includes parts of present-day Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. But when scholars discuss the narrations about Syria in the end times, they are referring to this wider blessed region. And this is critical, because sometimes we read prophetic traditions through the narrow lens of modern nationalism. The Prophet _Fdaf was not speaking about a passport. He was speaking about a spiritual center. There are authentic narrations in which he indicated that when trials intensify, when fitna spreads, when confusion becomes the norm rather than the exception, faith will find refuge in Sham. In one famous narration, when asked where the believers should go during times of tribulation, he directed attention toward that region. Scholars throughout the centuries reflected deeply on this. They understood that geography in Islam is not random. Certain lands carry symbolic weight because of the role they play in the unfolding of divine decree. But we must approach this carefully. The Prophet _Fdaf did not romanticize suffering. He did not say that the people of that land would be spared hardship. On the contrary, history shows that Sham has witnessed invasions, crusades, Mongol attacks, colonial fragmentation, and modern conflict. The blessing of a land does not mean the absence of pain. Sometimes, paradoxically, it means the presence of purpose. Psychologically, this forces us to rethink how we interpret turmoil. When we see instability, our immediate reaction is despair. We ask, how can a blessed land endure such tragedy? But Islamic theology teaches us that barakah is not measured by comfort. Barakah is measured by nearness to Allah, by the presence of scholarship, by resilience of faith. And historically, Sham has produced giants of knowledge, spirituality, and reform. Even during its darkest periods, it remained a center of learning and devotion. Philosophically, this raises a deeper question. Why does God attach sacred significance to certain spaces? The answer is not tribalism. It is not favoritism. Rather, it is about anchoring history in meaning. When believers know that a region is mentioned in prophetic narrations, it reminds them that history is not chaotic. It unfolds within divine knowledge. What appears random to us is not random to Allah. At the same time, scholars like Yasir Qadhi consistently caution against simplistic conclusions. Not every event in Syria is automatically a sign of the hour. Not every conflict fulfills a prophecy. The prophetic centrality of Sham is a theological principle, not a political slogan, and this distinction is crucial. When we blur it, we either sensationalize tragedy or we trivialize sacred texts. The deeper lesson here is about stability of faith. The Prophet _Fdaf pointed to Sham as a place where faith would gather during chaos. But faith gathering in a land begins with faith gathering in hearts. A region becomes spiritually central when its people hold firmly to truth, when scholars uphold justice, when believers refuse to surrender their principles under pressure. So, when we talk about Syria in the end times, we are not indulging in speculation. We are reminding ourselves that some lands carry a prophetic echo. They remind us that turmoil does not negate blessing. They remind us that divine wisdom operates beyond the news cycle. And most importantly, they remind us that if faith is meant to anchor itself somewhere on earth during the greatest trials, then faith must first anchor itself within us. Because in the end, the question is not simply what will happen in Sham. The question is this: when the world shakes, where will your faith stand? When we speak about Syria within the broader conversation of the end times, we have to confront a difficult but necessary concept: fitna. The Prophet _Fdaf warned that as history moves closer to its conclusion, trials will not simply increase in number, they will increase in intensity and confusion. It will not always be clear who is right and who is wrong. Truth will be clouded by propaganda, emotion, and competing narratives. And this is precisely what makes end-time tribulations so spiritually dangerous. Fitna, in its classical meaning, is a test that exposes what lies beneath the surface. The word itself implies being placed into fire in order to separate pure gold from impurity. That metaphor is powerful. Because trials are not merely punishments, they are revelations. They reveal sincerity from hypocrisy, conviction from convenience, principle from partisanship. When we observe turmoil in Syria, political fragmentation, ideological extremism, humanitarian catastrophe, the immediate instinct is to ask, why? But the more spiritually mature question is, what is being revealed? What is being exposed within communities? Within leadership? Within ourselves? The prophet Hadith described a time when a person would wake up as a believer and sleep as a disbeliever, or sleep as a believer and wake up having sold their faith for a portion of this world. Scholars throughout Islamic history reflected on this narration with deep concern. They understood that the greatest danger of fitna is not physical harm, it is moral disorientation. It is losing clarity about what is sacred. Psychologically, prolonged conflict does something to the human soul. It normalizes abnormality, it desensitizes us to suffering, it tempts us to justify what we would once have condemned. When violence becomes constant, ethical lines begin to blur, and this blurring is itself part of the trial. In end-time narrations, confusion is a recurring theme. People will struggle to distinguish between truth and falsehood, not because guidance is absent, but because noise is overwhelming. This is why scholars, including voices like Yasir Qadhi, consistently emphasize intellectual discipline during times of turmoil. We are warned not to let emotion override scholarship, not to let anger replace principle, not to let tribal loyalty supersede justice. The Quranic command to stand firmly for justice, even against ourselves, does not expire during war. In fact, it becomes more urgent. There is also a philosophical dimension here. We tend to assume that stability is the natural state of the world and chaos is an interruption. But Islamic theology teaches the opposite. This world is inherently unstable. It was never meant to be permanent. Its fragility is not a flaw in divine design. It is part of its function. Turmoil reminds us that ultimate security does not reside in political systems or military power. It resides in Allah, and yet, acknowledging divine wisdom does not mean passivity. Some people misuse end-time language to detach from responsibility. They say, these are signs of the hour, what can we do? But the Prophet Hadith never taught fatalism. Even when describing major eschatological events, he emphasized personal reform, ethical conduct, prayer, patience. The purpose of being informed about trials is not to become obsessed with timelines, it is to prepare the heart. In fact, one of the most dangerous responses to fitna is fascination. We become addicted to speculation. We consume endless analysis, predictions, conspiracy theories, and slowly, without realizing it, our spirituality becomes secondary to our curiosity. The Prophet warned us about chasing every rumor. Stability in faith requires restraint. So when we view Syria through the lens of end-time trials, we must resist two extremes, denial and sensationalism. Denial ignores the spiritual lessons embedded in suffering. Sensationalism exploits suffering to fuel fear. The balanced path is to see turmoil as a mirror, reflecting back to the Ummah its strengths, its fractures, its sincerity, its weaknesses. Because ultimately, the trials of the end times are not designed to inform us about the calendar of the Day of Judgment. They are designed to inform us about the condition of our hearts. And here is the question we must sit with. When confusion spreads and loyalties clash, will your faith be shaped by headlines or anchored in revelation? As we move deeper into this discussion, we have to address something that captures the imagination of many Muslims, the major signs of the hour that are connected in some narrations to the region. of Sham. This is where conversations often become emotionally charged, because we are no longer speaking about general trials. We are speaking about the climax of history itself. Among the most well-known narrations are those describing the descent of Prophet letter 2 BFI Macron SA Macron Arabic, Tain Arabic, Lam Arabic, Yet Arabic, Ha Arabic, Lif Arabic, Lam Arabic, Sin Arabic, Lam Arabic, Lif Arabic, Meme Jesus peace be upon him and his return near the end of time. The Prophet letter FDF, they informed us that letter 2 BFI Macron SA Macron will descend near a white minaret in the eastern part of Damascus. Damascus, of course, lies within historic Sham. Likewise, narrations mention that the final confrontation with Alam, Esim, Akron letter 1E25 Ad-Dajjal, the Antichrist, will culminate in that broader region. These reports are found in authentic Hadith collections and have been accepted by mainstream Sunni scholarship for centuries. But here is where intellectual responsibility becomes critical. The purpose of these narrations is not to turn us into amateur prophecy analysts. They are not invitations to decode every military movement or political alliance as a definitive fulfillment. The classical scholars were extremely cautious. They affirmed the texts, yes, but they also warned against attaching specific contemporary events to specific prophecies without clear, unequivocal evidence. And this caution is wisdom, because psychologically, human beings crave certainty. When the world feels chaotic, we want to believe we can map it neatly onto a prophetic blueprint. It gives us a sense of control. If we can say, this is that event, then we feel less anxious. But sometimes that desire for certainty pushes us into overconfidence. We begin making claims that neither the Quran nor the Sunnah explicitly make. Scholars like Yasir Qadhi often emphasize that believing in the major signs of the hour is part of our creed. The descent of letter 2 BFI Macron SA Macron, the emergence of Dajjal, the appearance of Yajuj and Majuj, these are not metaphors in orthodox Sunni theology. They are real events that will occur. But when and how they unfold is part of the unseen, and the unseen belongs to Allah. There is also a philosophical layer here. The Quran repeatedly reminds us that knowledge of the hour rests with Allah alone. Even the Prophet letter F, DFA, when asked about its timing, was instructed to say that its knowledge is with his Lord. That humility must define our approach. We affirm what is authentically reported. We avoid what is speculative. And we resist the temptation to turn sacred texts into sensational headlines. At the same time, the mention of Sham in connection with these major signs does elevate the spiritual significance of the region. It tells us that history is not drifting aimlessly. It is moving toward a divinely decreed conclusion. The return of letter 2, BFI Macron SA Macron, symbolizes the triumph of truth over falsehood. The defeat of Dajjal represents the exposure of ultimate deception. These are not just geopolitical events, they are moral archetypes. Truth will confront falsehood directly. Integrity will confront manipulation, and perhaps that is the deeper lesson for us today. The Dajjal is described as the greatest trial in human history, a trial of perception, of belief, of moral clarity. If the final confrontation will occur in a region connected to Sham, then that region becomes symbolically tied to the ultimate stand between truth and deception. But that stand does not begin in the future. It begins now in our own ethical choices. We must not reduce these narrations to maps and timelines. They are mirrors. They force us to ask, are we preparing our hearts for truth? Are we cultivating the discernment necessary to recognize deception? Because when the greatest signs appear, it will not simply be about geography, it will be about faith. So yes, the traditions link Sham to the dramatic close of history, but the real drama is not on the battlefield. It is in the human soul, and here is the reflection we must carry with us. If the final victory of truth is certain, the only uncertainty is where we will stand when that truth arrives. Once we understand that trials are inevitable, and that certain regions hold prophetic significance, the next question becomes unavoidable. What is expected of us? Because knowledge without responsibility can become a burden. If we speak about Syria, about Sham, about end-time narrations, but we do not translate that awareness into ethical transformation, then we have misunderstood the entire purpose of revelation. The Prophet ﷺ never taught eschatology as entertainment, he taught it as preparation. Every time he described the trials of the end times, whether it was the spread of injustice, the rise of deception, or the emergence of Dajjal, he paired that warning with guidance on how to respond. Strengthen your prayer, hold firmly to Arabic, Alif Arabic, Lam Arabic, Jim Arabic, Mim Arabic, Alif Arabic, Tain Arabic, Tetma but avoid Arabic, Dot Arabic, Lam Arabic, Mim. Guard your tongue, preserve your integrity. In other words, the response to chaos is character. This is profoundly important because when societies fracture, people often believe the solution is purely external. Change the regime, change the policy, change the borders, and while political reform has its place, Islamic teaching insists that moral reform is foundational. The Quran states clearly that Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. That principle does not become suspended during the end times, it becomes amplified. Psychologically, turmoil tempts us toward reaction rather than reflection. We become driven by outrage, and outrage, if not disciplined, can slowly erode sincerity. We begin justifying unethical behavior because the situation is extreme. But prophetic guidance never allowed ends to justify means. Even in war, even in persecution, there were boundaries. The believer's identity is not defined by circumstances, it is defined by principles. This is why scholars like Yasir Qadhi repeatedly stress balance. We are not called to apathy, but we are also not called to recklessness. We are not meant to withdraw from society, nor are we meant to lose ourselves in rage. The prophetic model is remarkably composed, firm but not fanatical, courageous but not cruel, engaged but spiritually anchored. And there is something deeper here. End-time narratives can sometimes produce a subconscious fatalism. People think if decline is prophesied, then why strive? If turmoil is inevitable, then why build? But that mindset contradicts the very ethos of Islam. The Prophet said that if the hour were to begin while one of you had a sapling in his hand, he should plant it. That statement is extraordinary. Even when history is collapsing, you plant, you build, you act righteously. That hadith is not about agriculture, it is about agency. It teaches that our duty is action, not outcome. Outcomes belong to Allah. Ethical effort belongs to us. So when we speak about Syria and the end times, we cannot limit the conversation to geography or prophecy. We must ask, are we embodying the values that would make us worthy of being among the people of faith during trials? Are we cultivating patience instead of impulsiveness, justice instead of partisanship, mercy instead of dehumanization? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. It is easy to discuss Dajjal in theory. It is harder to confront deception in our own biases. It is easy to speak about the return of letter 2, BFI Macron SA Macron as a symbol of truth. It is harder to stand for truth when it costs us socially or financially. The end times are not simply about dramatic global events. They are about personal moral clarity under pressure. They are about whether we will compromise when faith becomes inconvenient. They are about whether our Islam is cultural, emotional, reactive, or principled, thoughtful, and sincere. And so, the ethical responsibility of believers during turmoil is not optional. It is the very point of being informed about these narrations. We do not study prophecy to predict the future. We study it to purify the present. If history is moving toward a moment when truth will stand unmistakably clear, then the real preparation begins now, in the quiet, unseen decisions of our daily lives. Because when the world is tested, it is not nations that pass or fail first, it is hearts. At this stage in the discussion, we need to draw an important line, a line between political analysis and spiritual interpretation. Because one of the greatest mistakes people make when discussing Syria and the end times is collapsing these two categories into one. They assume that every geopolitical shift must directly correspond to a prophetic sign, And when that assumption is made, confusion is almost inevitable. Political analysis operates within the realm of cause and effect. It studies economics, power structures, foreign policy, sectarian tensions, historical grievances. It asks who benefits, who loses, what alliances are forming. These are legitimate questions. Islam does not forbid understanding the world through rational tools. In fact, the Quran repeatedly invites reflection, observation, and thoughtful engagement with reality. But spiritual prophecy operates in a different category. It deals with divine decree, the unseen, events that unfold according to wisdom beyond human forecasting. When the prophet F.D. described certain end-time signs, he was not giving a political science lecture. He was giving moral orientation. The purpose was guidance, not geopolitical prediction. The problem arises when we force one framework into the other. When a conflict erupts, some immediately declare it the fulfillment of a specific hadith. When alliances shift, someone claims it must be Gog and Magog. And when events do not unfold exactly as predicted, faith can become shaken. Why? Because expectations were built not on clear textual certainty, but on speculative interpretation. This is why scholars, including contemporary voices like Yasir Qadhi, consistently emphasize methodological discipline. Our tradition has rules. Not every weak narration can be used to construct an end-time scenario. Not every ambiguous report can be tied to modern headlines. Classical scholars were deeply cautious about specifying fulfillments. They understood the danger of overconfidence in matters of the unseen. There is also a psychological dimension here that we cannot ignore. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. We are uncomfortable with randomness. When we see suffering, especially prolonged suffering, we want it to fit into a grand narrative. And prophecy offers a powerful narrative. It tells us history has direction that is comforting, but comfort can sometimes lead to projection. We begin to see what we want to see, and when religious language is attached too quickly to political events, it can intensify division. If one group believes it represents the prophesied camp of truth, compromise becomes betrayal, dialogue becomes weakness, nuance becomes suspicion. In this way, misapplied eschatology can inflame the very fitna it claims to interpret. Islamic scholarship, at its best, resists this impulsiveness. It teaches us to affirm what is clear, suspend judgment where there is ambiguity, and avoid speaking about the unseen without knowledge. The Quran's warning against conjecture is not limited to theology. It extends to how we speak about unfolding events. None of this means we detach from reality. We are still required to care about justice, to oppose Arabic, thought Arabic, lam Arabic, meme, to assist the oppressed within our capacity. But we do so grounded in principle, not prophecy speculation. We analyze politics with intellectual rigor. We approach hadith with theological humility, and we refuse to weaponize sacred texts to validate our preferred narratives. There is maturity in saying, Allah knows best. There is strength in restraint. The Prophet F.D. warned that towards the end of time, knowledge would decrease and ignorance would spread. Part of preserving knowledge is preserving its methodology, resisting sensationalism, resisting emotional absolutism. Ultimately, the goal is stability. When faith is tied too tightly to specific political predictions, it rises and falls with news cycles. But when faith is anchored in revelation, properly understood, it remains steady regardless of headlines. So as we continue reflecting on Syria and the end times, let us hold two truths at once. History has meaning, and we do not control its script. Our role is not to decode every event as prophecy fulfilled. Our role is to respond to every event with integrity. Because in the end, it is not our predictions that will be judged. It is our principles. As we bring this discussion to its final reflection, it is crucial that we recalibrate our emotional compass. When people hear end times, the dominant reaction is fear. When they hear about Syria, about turmoil, about major signs, the imagination gravitates toward catastrophe. But Islamic eschatology, when understood holistically, is not a theology of despair. It is a theology of ultimate justice. Yes, there are trials, yes, there is Dajjal, yes, there is immense turmoil, but that is not where the story ends. The narrative arc of Islamic eschatology bends toward restoration, the return of letter 2, BFI Macron SA Macron Arabic, Tain Arabic, Lam Arabic, Yet Arabic, Ha Arabic, Alif Arabic, Lam Arabic, Sin Arabic, Lam Arabic, Alif Arabic. Meme is not merely an event, it is a declaration that truth will reassert itself in history. The defeat of Dajjal is not simply the fall of a deceiver, it is the exposure of falsehood at its peak. Even the trials of Yajuj and Majuj conclude with divine intervention. The message is unmistakable. Corruption may intensify, but it is temporary. This is profoundly important for the psychology of the believer. A community that internalizes only the chaos of end-time narrations can become anxious, reactionary, even fatalistic. But a community that internalizes their conclusion becomes resilient. Hope in Islam is not naive optimism. It is conviction rooted in divine promise. When we speak about Syria in this context, we are not simply analyzing a region's political volatility. We are recognizing that even lands drenched in hardship are not abandoned by divine wisdom. If anything, their mention in prophetic traditions reminds us that Allah's plan unfolds in places we least expect, through events we struggle to comprehend. There is also a philosophical depth here that we must not overlook. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that Arabic, Alif Arabic, Lam Arabic, Dot Arabic, Lam Arabic, Meme oppression is never permanent. It may dominate for a season, but it cannot define eternity. The day of judgment itself is the ultimate equalizer. Every injustice, every drop of blood, every betrayal of trust will be accounted for with absolute precision. That certainty transforms how we process suffering. It does not remove grief, it reframes it. And scholars like Yasir Qadhi often remind audiences that the purpose of studying the end times is not to obsess over catastrophe, but to strengthen conviction in accountability. When you know history ends with divine justice, you become less tempted to compromise your integrity in the present. You stop thinking short-term. You stop measuring success purely by worldly dominance. Hope, however, is not passive. It demands action. If we truly believe that truth will ultimately prevail, then we must align ourselves with truth now. If we believe that deception will eventually collapse, then we must refuse to participate in deception, even when it is socially convenient. If we believe that justice will stand victorious, then we must embody justice in our own dealings. The end of history in Islamic thought is not chaos consuming everything. It is clarity breaking through confusion, it is light piercing darkness, and perhaps the most powerful realization is this: we do not need to witness the final chapters to be part of that victory. Every act of sincerity, every moment of patience, every stand for justice is a fragment of that larger triumph. So when we reflect on Syria, on Sham, on trials and major signs, let us not leave overwhelmed, let us leave anchored. The Prophet ﷺ did not inform us about the future to frighten us into paralysis. He informed us so that we would live the present with purpose. Because the real question is not whether we will see the end of history unfold. The real question is whether, when history closes its final chapter, we will be counted among those who stood firm for truth when it mattered most. And that choice is being written, not in headlines, but in the quiet decisions we make every single day.